Hi, I'm Tatiana, and this is an overview of the popular technology marketing book called Crossing the Chasm. This is part of the 6-month MBA series where I cover a number of books that have been hailed by marketers and technologists as getting an MBA through just reading this book list. I also made a few additions that I thought were helpful from my own experience in the technology space. I put the link to the reading list below in the description, and I don't want to take credit for the list. I know it's been out for a while, so I tried to give credit to the person who did. And same thing with this video. The intention of this video isn't to pass the content off as my own, but rather to share the concepts that I found really applicable in my experience as working as a marketer, and some things I agree with, some things I'd like to challenge, and just really highlight what's relevant today. So the goal of that is to help people familiarize themselves with go-to-market concepts that they might not have been exposed to yet. And I also just know a lot of people don't like reading in general, so this doesn't replace reading the book, but at least you can get a little bit of knowledge from people who have taken the time to compile that knowledge in a book. If you have a product or a go-to-market question, maybe you're a founder or wannabe founder, or just looking to break into the go-to-market side of things, try and put that question in the comments. Again, I'm not going over all of the book, but maybe there's a section or a concept that I can jump to in the future and do a little blurb on, and I'd be happy to do that. So let's get into it and start talking about Crossing the Chasm. So like I said, this is part of the 6-month MBA series. If you watched my 5 things I'm doing after being laid off series or video, this is part of my strategy to skill myself up. So you're welcome to join me as we go through this book list. Crossing the Chasm is a book by Geoffrey Moore, who's considered a technology marketing theorist. He brought to light a model or framework called the technology adoption lifecycle. This was important because it highlighted that there are 5 different psychological social groups when implementing technology adoption. So what that means, like outside of tech marketer speak, is it's 5 different kinds of people who are going to use your technology. And he traces those different psychological types and how they interact with technology, their comfort level, when they adopt, and why that matters for marketers. So I thought this book was great. It was written in the early 90s, and I would definitely put this in my list of relevant today category. Like, I think this has been my experience when being part of product launches and interviewing clients during product launches. So many decades later, many marketers and technologists still agree with Geoffrey Moore, and I'm one of them. So Moore proposed the fundamental problem is that product and product go-to-market strategies need to evolve as products are adopted and penetrate different phases of the technology marketing adoption lifecycle. So what that means is, if you think of a bell curve and the 5 different phases or the 5 different groups of technology adoption, there are 5 different groups, and you penetrate each group as you gain momentum, and that's great, but there's a chasm between 2 of the groups, and the strategy that you use to penetrate the first 2 groups is going to be very different from the strategy that you use to gain momentum with the vast majority. So that's the overview of the model. Again, this is called the technology adoption life cycle, and it looks something like this. So, like I said, there are distinct sections within the technology adoption lifecycle. We're going to go over the 5 sections, how to market to them, and what that means for you, and then a few examples. So starting with the innovators, these are the people who are the explorers and adventurers in technology. this is your friend who's always bringing you a new app, like, oh, you have to try this app. For me, that person is one of my older brothers. Terrence, if you see this, this is you. The innovator seeks out new technology because it excites them. They want the latest and greatest. They're willing to test, and they're willing to explore and probably add a little bit to your engineer's documentation. So these are the people who, like, if you're like me, you need 90 days of them using the app to know if it's even worth your time. These are the people who are going to spend that trial time of an unknown app by an unknown developer, and they're happy about that. And so that brings us to the next section. After the innovators, who are usually considered technologists, we have the early adopters, which Moore describes as very comfortable with technology. Usually the innovator's next stop when they find something good. So they're spreading, the information word of mouth that this technology is useful and great. And that matters to the early adopter because the early adopter is a visionary who uses the technology to solve their own problem. So they don't necessarily need to be told how to use the technology. If you tell them the capabilities, they can figure out how to use it, and they can figure out which problems it applies to. I think I personally fall into the category of early adopter. One example that I like to use when I think about this group is like LinkedIn Sales Navigator. If you're not familiar, LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a tool that salespeople use to reach out to prospects. So if you ever get those in-mails on LinkedIn, it might be from using the LinkedIn Sales Navigator tool. And that's what it's for. That's how LinkedIn has positioned the tool. Long before I was ever using LinkedIn Sales Navigator for sales, I was using it to find mentors. I was like, oh, I can talk to basically anyone I want on LinkedIn with this tool. What I need most early in my career is someone to tell me what to do, and that's what I did. And so that was an example of me seeing and ascribing a value to this tool based on an existing problem that I had without someone having to tell me, this is how you can use this tool. So early adopters might not necessarily use the product in the way that the inventor or creator imagined and positioned the product, but they're a great group to get your use cases from and really understand the value of your product in the market. And then the next group is the early majority. So the early majority is just what it sounds like. This is one of the larger chunks of the technology adoption lifecycle. So we're getting towards the middle of that bell curve. And the early majority is about 1/3 of your target market. And they are the pragmatist. They will use this technology if it solves a specific problem that has predefined use cases. So, for example, I think a great example here is Workday. Workday solves a range of predefined problems in HR management. The early majority is adopting Workday as they see the use cases and see how it relates very clearly to their pain, and not one moment before those use cases and that positioning has been defined. I think this group is pretty familiar with technology. So when you think of these people, these are not people who are afraid of technology. They only use it if they have to solve their problems. They're happy to use it. They just care about what solves their problems. They're really the pragmatists in your customer segment. So after you brought the technology to market, you've iterated, you've established your use cases with the early adopters, you hit the early majority and people are adopting the technology in waves, you've gotten a lot of momentum. That brings us to the late majority. The late majority is very similar to the early majority in that they need well-established use cases. The product has to be signed, sealed, and secure. They care a lot about security in my personal experience. But they might not be as comfortable with technology as the early majority or other customer segments early along in the technology adoption lifecycle. And so what that means in practice, which I don't remember seeing this in the book, but what that means in practice in my experience is these groups in the late majority, these people in the late majority, need enablement. So they need a lot more hand-holding when adopting technology. They're willing to do it, They're happy to do it, but do need more support. So when you're looking for roles that say professional services or customer enablement, these kinds of roles, that's what they're doing. They're helping the customer adopt the technology. There's a ton of money in the early majority and the late majority. This level of momentum comes after, again, you've done a ton of R&D and made that upfront investment. And so your profit margins are usually higher, in addition to this being 60% of your target market, as proposed by Geoffrey Moore, which we'll see if that holds true across, all of the cases. If you have a use case that you'd like to propose, put it in the comments. If you have a case where you don't think this technology adoption lifecycle applies, I would really like to hear that. I think it holds true though. So about 60% of your market sits here and they have the highest profit margins. So this is where every founder, every product marketer is looking to reach and attain. I think another thing to keep in mind about these two groups is it's really important to keep those use cases front and center. You want to have that locked down before you try and go after these two groups of people. And that's what the chasm is all about. Many technology strategies fail because they attempt to either start with a flagship product that doesn't engage or inspire the innovators and early adopters, so they don't get their awesome use cases right away, and then they'll go after a group of people who need to see the value on paper but are not necessarily inspired by the idea of the technology itself. And so they're less willing to explore and give you that lockdown use case or value proposition, whereas the earlier two groups might. So that's something to keep in mind when you think about go-to-market strategies. Now, the great thing about these groups is 60% of the market, they have all the money. So that's something to keep in mind. And the last group is called the laggards. Moore proposes that there is a group of people who will only use technology if they absolutely have to, and even then it's like pulling teeth. I think everybody knows someone like this. You know what? I was trying to think of an example in my family, but my family is kind of tech savvy. Oh, I know, my sister, her and Adobe have beef. PDFs, something about PDFs trigger my sister, and she's younger than me. So it's really weird because she's Gen Z, but she would fall into the group of laggards. She avoids anything with a battery and will only use technology if she needs to, and that's because they're not comfortable using technology. And so that group typically is not worth pursuing from a go-to-market standpoint unless it's unknowingly. Unless they don't have to interact with the technology and you can still sell it to them. Moore proposed the example of a microprocessor in a computer. I thought that was a fantastic example. So this is the first part of Crossing the Chasm. I thought this was a really helpful book for people who are interested in product marketing and product creation, like a product designer who's thinking about launching a new product, like working on launching a new product. You want to make sure you engage the innovators and early adopters. And then for designers, product managers, product marketers, and founders who are thinking about how am I going to capture that larger line share of the market, definitely have a plan and strategy for how you speak to this group over here, which are the innovators and early adopters, and then a different go-to-market plan and strategy for how you speak to the early and late majorities. That's something that's really important. Now, a note on that. If you want your product to capture the lion's share of the market, the product itself, your product should engage the innovators, so you want to excite the innovators. It should also have a level of inherent value to the early adopters. You should come to the early adopters with a clear value statement that they can bounce off of and do their own exploration and application of your product. And then you want to do a ton of customer research at this point, because having that value statement that you can bring to the early and late majority is important. But what I'm getting to is the product itself needs to engage the innovators, be a springboard for the early adopters. So enough for the early adopters to be a springboard. The product itself needs to translate to both majority groups. So while the go-to-market strategy is different, the product itself should have an inherent value that translates across all of these groups. And I think that's something important to keep in mind as you plan iterating your product and plan overall your go-to-market strategy. The other thing to keep in mind is that it takes time and upfront investment to launch a product. And I think most people watching this channel know this, but your ROI down here is gonna be negative. You have to do research, you have to iterate, you have to do like customer investigation. It takes a lot to get something off of the ground, but if you want to make that superstar, Instagram, amazing product that changes your generation, it costs that level of investment, and that's something that you should like always be thinking about and prepared to share with your investors as well. It costs that level of investment, and the time to cross the chasm, it could be longer than you think. So I just wanted to put that tidbit in there. I have a lot of friends who are founders, and sometimes, maybe like get ahead of themselves, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. I'm cheering you on, and I just want to say it's okay if you don't see that return on investment earlier on. You might have a hit on your hands, and it might just require a different go-to-market strategy. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was Crossing the Chasm Part 1. Part 2 is all about different strategies to actually cross the chasm. So it's all about those go-to-market strategies. I'm super excited to wrap up this book. After this, I'm planning to do 0 to 1, which is a product management book that I have been wanting to read for ages, and it's just been sitting on my list. So I actually haven't read that one. I'm really excited to be going through the series. If you found this video valuable, please subscribe and follow along, and we will get our 6-month MBAs together. Shout out to everyone who's watched this long. It's been real. I am actually going to Afrotech next week, so the next video might take a little longer than normal, but once I get back, it will usually be 2 parts per book released once a week. So I think that puts us on track for 6 months. Someone correct my math if I'm wrong. Okay, y'all, I appreciate you watching this far. Thanks. Bye.